Beloved voices have a way of living forever. But on the night of October 25th, 2017, inside a packed arena in Nashville, there was a quiet fear moving through the crowd. Everyone could feel it, even before a single note was sung. This wasn't just another concert. This was the night the world said goodbye to a legend. And somewhere behind the curtain, two lifelong friends were about to face a moment neither of them had ever been ready for. Because when Dolly Parton walked toward Kenny Rogers that night, she knew something the audience didn't. The Bridgestone Arena in Nashville was glowing with lights, cameras, and the kind of anticipation that only surrounds a farewell. Thousands of fans had filled every seat. Many had followed Kenny Rogers for decades. They had grown up with his voice drifting through radios, late-night jukeboxes, and long highway drives. For them, Kenny wasn't just a singer. He was part of the soundtrack of their lives. But backstage, the mood was very different. Kenny Rogers sat quietly in a dressing room, his famous silver beard carefully trimmed, his stage jacket hanging nearby. At 79 years old, he had lived more than most performers could ever dream of. Hit records, sold-out tours, awards stacked across shelves. Yet on this night, there was something fragile about him that few people outside the room could see. His body had been quietly fighting battles for years. Pain had begun creeping into his bones long before the public announcement of his farewell tour. Doctors had warned him that the endless travel, the lights, the late nights, and the strain of performing could no longer continue the way they once had. What fans saw on stage was still the confident performer who had sung The Gambler to millions. But behind closed doors, the exhaustion was real. Still, Kenny had one final wish for this night. He didn't want it to feel like a funeral. He wanted it to feel like a celebration. That's why the stage that evening would welcome some of the biggest names in music. Friends, admirers, legends who had grown alongside him in the industry. There would be appearances by artists who owed part of their careers to the path Kenny Rogers had carved. And yet, there was one person everyone in the building was secretly waiting for. Dolly Parton. Their friendship had lasted nearly 40 years. Long before this farewell night, long before the cameras and tributes, their story had begun with something simple and rare in the entertainment world: genuine affection. When Kenny Rogers first met Dolly Parton in the early 1980s, something clicked instantly between them. Not romance, despite what rumors would claim for decades. It was something deeper and strangely more powerful. They trusted each other. That kind of bond is rare in Hollywood. Fame often turns friendships into transactions, but Kenny and Dolly always seemed immune to that poison. When they recorded Islands in the Stream together in 1983, no one expected the song to become one of the most beloved duets in music history. Written by the Bee Gees and produced with a pop-country sound that felt fresh and timeless, the track exploded across radio stations worldwide. Fans couldn't get enough of the chemistry between Kenny and Dolly. They laughed together in interviews. They teased each other on stage. They looked like two people who genuinely enjoyed sharing the spotlight instead of competing for it. The world began asking the same question over and over. Were they secretly in love? Both of them laughed at that rumor for years. Dolly would joke that if they had ever actually tried dating, it probably would have ruined their friendship. Kenny agreed. Whatever magic existed between them was stronger as friendship than it would ever be as romance. But friendship doesn't protect. People from time. As the years passed, both of their lives became more complicated. Kenny went through several marriages, public divorces, and the constant pressure of staying relevant in a changing music industry. Dolly continued building an empire of music, movies, and philanthropy while protecting her famously private marriage to Carl Dean. Even as their paths drifted apart professionally, the connection never disappeared. They still called each other, still joked like old friends, still remembered the years when they were touring the world together, standing under stage lights that seemed like they would last forever. But forever has a way of quietly ending. By the time 2017 arrived, Kenny Rogers had finally admitted something he had avoided saying for years. His body was tired. The farewell tour wasn't just a marketing idea, it was the final chapter of a life spent performing. His doctors had warned him that the strain of touring could become dangerous. Traveling city to city had become harder than he allowed the public to see. Yet he insisted on one last moment with the fans, one last tour, and one final concert in Nashville. That night, the backstage hallways were filled with famous faces. Reba McEntire had come to honor the man who had helped shape country music. Lionel Richie, who had written Lady for Kenny decades earlier, arrived carrying memories of the early 1980s when the song changed both of their careers. Even younger artists stood quietly nearby, watching the moment unfold like students witnessing history. But none of them carried the emotional weight that Dolly did. When she stepped into the building, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone knew that her appearance would be the heart of the night. She had dressed carefully for the performance, choosing an outfit that sparkled under the stage lights but still felt respectful of the moment. Dolly Parton, stood showmanship better than almost anyone in entertainment. Yet even she felt something unusual in her chest that evening. It wasn't excitement. It was grief she hadn't yet admitted to herself. Because when she saw Kenny earlier that evening, something inside her broke a little. He smiled the same way he always had, the warm grin that had charmed audiences for decades. But there was a slower rhythm to his movements now, a heaviness in the way he stood. Time had caught up with the man who once seemed unstoppable. They hugged quietly backstage, no cameras, no microphones. Just two old friends standing together while the noise of the arena echoed somewhere beyond the hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kenny laughed softly and said something that Dolly would later remember for the rest of her life. He told her he was glad she came, because he didn't know how many more chances they would have, like this. Dolly didn't answer right away. She just squeezed his hand. For decades, they had joked about everything. They had teased each other in front of audiences, making fans laugh with playful insults and exaggerated stories. But on this night, something felt different. Something heavier. As the concert began, artist after artist stepped onto the stage to honor Kenny Rogers. Songs from his long career filled the arena. The crowd cheered loudly for every tribute. It felt like a festival celebrating a legend who had given everything to music. But backstage, Dolly waited quietly. She listened to the songs drifting through the speakers. And she knew that when her moment arrived, it would not be just another duet. It would be a goodbye neither of them had ever truly prepared for. Out in the audience, thousands of fans were still laughing and singing along. They believed they were watching the end of a career. They didn't yet realize they were witnessing the closing chapter of one of the most beloved friendships in music history. And when Dolly finally stepped onto that stage beside Kenny Rogers, The emotions that had been buried for 40 years were about to rise to the surface in a way that would leave the entire room in stunned silence. Type "Continue" when you're ready for the next part. Continue. Legendary friendships in music often look effortless from the outside. Two voices meet, a harmony forms, and the world assumes it has always been that way. But the truth behind the bond between Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers had always been deeper, stranger, and far more emotional than the public ever realized. And on the night of October 25, 2017, as the farewell concert continued in Nashville, memories from nearly 4 decades began drifting through both of their minds like ghosts returning for one last visit. The audience inside Bridgestone Arena was electric. The tributes had already been powerful. Artists walked onto the stage one by one, sharing stories, singing Kenny's songs, laughing about old memories. For the crowd, it felt like a grand celebration. But backstage, Kenny Rogers sat quietly for long moments between appearances, listening to the applause echo through the walls. He had spent most of his life hearing that sound, but on this night, the applause felt different. It carried the weight of endings. His hands rested on the arms of a chair as he watched the stage monitors showing the performances happening outside. There were flashes of his younger years on the screens, old footage of concerts, interviews, and awards. A younger Kenny smiling confidently under bright lights. A younger Kenny whose voice carried endless energy. But the man sitting backstage now was nearly 80. Years of touring had worn down his body. There had been surgeries, pain that didn't always go away. Doctors had warned him more than once that the constant travel was becoming dangerous. His voice was still strong, but the physical strain of performing had slowly taken its toll. Still, Kenny had insisted on this farewell show. He wanted one final moment surrounded by the people who had shaped his life. And above all, he wanted Dolly there. Their friendship had survived so many chapters that even they sometimes struggled to explain it. In the early 1980s, when they first began working together, the industry wasn't sure what to make of the pairing. Kenny was already a massive star with crossover hits reaching pop audiences. Dolly was country royalty, with a voice that could melt even the hardest critic. When their duet, Islands in the Stream, was released in 1983, something magical happened almost instantly. The song shot up the charts. Radio stations played it endlessly. It crossed genres in a way few songs ever did. But the real magic wasn't just the music. It was the way they looked at each other while singing. Fans noticed it immediately. Their smiles felt genuine. Their laughter didn't seem rehearsed. When Dolly leaned toward Kenny during performances, there was an energy between them that cameras couldn't fake. Soon, the rumors started. Reporters asked if they were secretly in love. Tabloids printed stories claiming their chemistry had to be more than friendship. Dolly always laughed when she heard those stories. She would tell interviewers that Kenny was one of the few men she